Alright, so let's talk a little bit about dimensioning. So up until this point, we've talked a little bit about multi-view sketches, and now we're kind of going to add a new layer to the mix by adding some dimensions in there. So why do we need to dimension? Well, when you have engineers or designers in a company that are trying to communicate ideas, it's a lot easier to have a picture like we've talked about before that's clearly labeled, and it has not just what something looks like, but it also has the size of something in there. So there's two things that we need to know, or two basic types of dimensions that we'll start off talking about, and those are size dimensions and location dimensions. So just like it sounds, size dimensions are going to tell you the size of an object. So for this example here, the red dimensions are going to be telling you the size of this cube, how big it is, so how wide it is, how deep it is, how tall it is, how large this hole is. But then you have the location dimensions, which are the blue ones, and that's going to tell you where something is, the location. So like this blue dimension here is going to show you where the hole is as far as the width in terms of the distance from this left edge here, and it's also going to tell you the height location from the bottom to the center point, or the center line of this hole. So it's essential in communicating for a company to be able to communicate not just what something looks like, but a lot of the times they have to deal with the specific size, and if something is not labeled correctly on paper or on the computer, then it's not necessarily going to be manufactured properly. So the size and location dimensions are essential to being able to communicate what an object looks like to others. So when we're dimensioning, I want you to think about the three different dimensions as far as visual dimensions that we're looking at. So we have the width of an object, so we can actually see the width of an object in our front view here. We can also see width in our top view. The next dimension we're going to look at is the height. So the height can be seen in my front view. It can also be seen in my right view. So front and right view will show you height. Then you have your depth, and the depth dimensions can be seen in my top view, and they can also be seen in my right view. So in each of these views, the top view, the front view, and the right view, there are two dimensions that you can see. So because they're two-dimensional drawings, or 2D drawings, you can only see two in each. So in my top view, I can see the width and the depth. In my front view, I can see the width and the height. And in the right view, I can see the height and the depth. So from there, let's take it another step further, and let's look at the different line types. So here's an example of an object in one particular view being dimensioned. So you have size and location dimensions, but there's different types. So each of these is a dimension. So you have one dimension here, you have another dimension, 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions total for this particular view. So each of those dimensions has 3 different attributes to it. So one of them being a dimension line. Don't overcomplicate it. Those are the ones with the arrowheads. So the dimension line is going to have the arrowhead. It's also going to have the number attached to it, whatever the measurement is. Then you have extension lines. So an extension line is going to be just that. It's an extension of the object. So whatever face it's referencing. So in this case, our dimension right here, the 1.25, the extension line for that is extended out from the left side edge, and it's also extended out from the right edge here. And then in the middle we have our dimension line. So the extension line extends from the object. It's really important here that you have a space or a little gap there called an extension line gap, and that's going to ensure that you're not confusing the dimension with the object or the object line. The last thing there is called a leader line. That's the last type that we can have. And a leader line is going to be more for circles and arcs. So if you see a hole, or there's some kind of circle that's being extruded or pulled out from an object, those are usually referenced by using a leader line. And that's going to always point to the center of the circle or the arc. And then it's going to be drawn out away from the object. And then you have your dimension here. So our little Ninja Turtle here, like I like to call it, is referencing the diameter of the circle. Anytime we have a hole or a circle, you're always going to dimension that as the diameter. If you ever have an arc, that's going to always be dimensioned as the radius. So this is just a practice. So in this example here, you have the isometric, you have the multi-view, and you have some of the dimensions. And there's 3 of them that are missing. So there's one depth dimension that's missing, there's one width dimension that's missing, and there's also one height dimension that's missing. So see if you can tell which one is if you want to pause the video. Alright, so let's check and see what it is. So here they are. There's 3 of them. Here's the one depth dimension that's missing. I have an overall depth, but then I also have the depth here from this face right here, or this face in the isometric, to the front face. The distance from here all the way up to the front is 2. So from our height or our front view, we're missing one width dimension. We know that the overall object is 3 units. We know that the distance from the left edge here to this edge right here, we know that's 1. But we also need to know what the dimension is from this outside edge to this face right here. And that's what the 2 is right here, a width dimension. Okay, we also have the height dimension that's missing. And that's just simply the overall or the total height of the object was not included. So this particular drawing would now be completely or fully defined. It's really important as you're dimensioning not to duplicate or copy information. So if I have this depth dimension here of the overall depth of the object, I don't need it here as well. So for this object, I would only need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different dimensions. It may not necessarily be laid out like this. You could lay it out different ways, but you need 8 total for this particular object. Now let's talk about where they're placed, or the placement of dimensions, what they can look like. These are just some examples for you if you need them. You can also see how the different arrowheads can be drawn. Just kind of particulars there, different ways they can be drawn. Diameters, this is how we can dimension diameters, so just some examples here of what they can look like if you need some examples. And then also dimensioning radius or radii, however you say that. This is what they look like. So if you're dimensioning something that's not a complete circle, you're always going to dimension the radius of it. You notice that none of these are complete circles, so we're dimensioning the radius of it using a leader line. And that's it. That's the basics.